Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, just a couple days away from Penn State game. How you doing?
Good. It's not the game week, but it's a game week, which is pretty good.
Right. It is a game week against a team. Some of the players were asked if this is a rivalry on Wednesday night, and some were like, no. And others were like, well, the games have been close the last couple of years. It's fun to play against them. But
which team has won more games against Ohio State since 2002? Penn State or Purdue?
Based on the two teams in that question, I will say Purdue.
False. Trick question. Both have beaten Ohio State 4 times since 2002, but Purdue has had 6 fewer chances. So is Ohio State-Purdue a rivalry?
I believe we did do Purdue Monday for about 6 years.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people taping red X's over the P's on campus this week. Yeah, jumping into bodies of water. Yeah,
fact,
a lot of that.
That does not happen. And Ryan Day, did he say the team out east?
No. Willing to say the name of opposing team. It's cute that Penn State wants to be Ohio State's rival, but that position is filled.
It would be fun if they were rivals and they would call Penn State the team in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And all of the fans would have to use all of those TITMON.
Yeah, it's
Titmon?
Yeah. We have to workshop that one. Yeah, it's this is I think the old Depression era, no Irish need apply kind of signs that were taped in the windows of businesses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no Nittany Lions need apply. Yeah. The position of rival has been filled at Ohio State.
And they're not really actually looking for any others because they're having fun with the one they've got.
They are, yes.
They're not done with it yet.
And just in case Notre Dame is interested, no Irish need apply.
Nope, indeed. So we talked to Ryan Day. First, Ryan Day had his radio show where he answered a few questions. And then he had his lightning round where he answered a few more. And today he talked about, here's an interesting thing. It's a big recruiting weekend for Ohio State. And so when it's a big recruiting weekend, you like to spend some time with recruits. When it's a big recruiting weekend and a big game, you have to choose the game over the recruits. And that's what Ryan Day and his coaches are going to have to do this weekend. They have sent a letter out to the recruits saying, hey, it's a big game. We're probably not going to have as much FaceTime with you. See you Sunday.
Yeah, we love you, but we may not be able to give you big hugs before the game. We're going to be busy trying to beat Penn State.
And so he said this is one of those bucket list games where you check a box off where the kids are coming to experience the atmosphere and see the game. And they should know. He said it's up to the position coaches to make sure the players know that it's not going to be a whole bunch of chummy because there's business to be had. And this is the game for recruits this year to come to. And so Ryan Day's been pleading with the fans, not for recruiting purposes, but they should get a show. The weather kind of stinks. The noon game kind of stinks. But if the fans and everybody is still able to bring it, then it's hard to imagine recruits would go away unhappy.
Well, it wasn't raining last year for the Michigan game, but it was chilly and it was gray and it was a noon kickoff. And I'm going to guess that anyone who was in Ohio Stadium that day who was a high school recruit walked away thinking that would be fun to do that to a team like that. That would be a thing I would be interested in being a part of. If Ohio State plays reasonably well, the atmosphere is going to be fine. The noon kickoff is not ideal. They generally tend to try and do these big recruiting weekends at night whenever they can. The Michigan State game was one of the big recruiting weekends this year as well. But if Ohio State keeps playing the way Ohio State is, and the crowd will be into it. That shouldn't be a big concern, even with a noon kickoff. I don't think that'll be a big issue. I think the recruits will get the show that they're looking for.
This is also senior day with 26 odd seniors walking. 2 seniors. Well, actually, was C.J. Saunders listed as one of the? I believe he was.
C.J. Saunders was listed. The most interesting thing about this year, the people walking with this year's seniors, is the senior who's potentially not walking with this year's seniors,
and that is linebacker Justin Hilliard, who is seeking a 6th year. The fact that he's not walking is interesting because, and Ryan Day said they're still working it out. He wants to return. If my thinking, I thought that perhaps he would maybe transfer out for his 6th year and go somewhere where he knows he's going to play. However, Tom, if he's choosing not to walk after graduating from Ohio State, and it's saying this is the best 5 years of his life a few weeks ago, that tells me that he is planning on coming back to Ohio State and nowhere else.
Right, yeah. If you were graduating, he already has graduated, but if you were potentially knowing that this is, your plan was to go somewhere else and this was going to be your last game at Ohio State, you treat that like your senior day.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think, the most definitive piece of information to me that not only does Justin Hilliard expect to be back next year, he also expects to be back at Ohio State next year.
Yeah, and Ryan Day was also asked, have you thought about letting juniors who are leaving early walk? And he said, no, it's for the seniors, guys who have been there 4 or 5 years. He's not saying that's the right way to do it. That's just the way they do it. But I do believe it is the right way to do it because it is about the seniors. It's senior day. It's not goodbye day. It's not leavers day. It's not abandoners day. Mm-hmm. It's not quitters day. Mm-hmm. It's senior day.
Mm-hmm. What would be a good treasonous day for Guy Fawkes Day? It's not Guy Fawkes Day. There you go.
Last year, boring day.
Last year was Sam Hubbard participated in senior tackle, but not senior day. Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. So that might be a more interesting little data point because last year Sam Hubbard got to do senior tackle because he had already graduated, and I'm making air quotes here. He hadn't made his decision yet about the NFL. I don't know if I made those air quotes big enough for the statement I just made there, but I'm limited by the size of this car. There are guys who, I'm going to make those air quotes again, haven't made their decision yet, but probably we know which way they're leaning. It'll be interesting to see whether they participate in senior tackle or if that's like limited to guys who've already graduated or what.
Yeah, and there's going to be a number of juniors who will be leaving, and you would think that, 3 years, I don't know if you've given enough after 3 years to be able to do senior tackle. 4 years, you actually are a senior at that point. Mm-hmm. So go ahead and do that. We'll see. The Penn State game, Tom, do you want to talk about Penn State? Was there anything else from Ryan Day that caught your eye today?
I asked him about the reports about Noah Cain being a game-time decision, KJ Hamler being in concussion protocol. I asked him, so, how much does that impact your game prep, that uncertainty? Does that change how you're approaching this game? Do you have to, look at it, prep for a couple different situations? He goes, oh, no, they're playing. And it was like, okay, but hypothetically, in a general circumstance, if you're not sure, how does that change? He goes, you just prepare as if they're playing. And, if they're not, they're not. But
yeah, he totally stiff-armed you, Tom. He's like, yeah, no, they're playing. I hear your question. I appreciate it. But they're playing.
I would object to that because I'm not sure he appreciated it. But maybe he did. I don't know. Hard to tell. Yeah, it was like, because I think you would think, hey, this changes a little bit what their offense is. If KJ Hamler's not there, that changes what they're going to do because that takes their big deep threat away. That takes one of their kind of bigger receiving targets away. The rest of their wide receiver core is pretty small. I mean, if you look at the size of their receivers, just the size. Like, they don't have, like, that 6'5" kind of Ben Victor size guy. So if you have KJ Hamler out, that seems like that's going to change what Penn State's going to do. Ryan Day, though, seemed extremely certain that KJ Hamler and Noah Cain were going to play this week.
Wait, Tom, trust me. They're going to play.
Does Ryan Day have spies inside the Penn State program? My column.
He has a membership to Blue White Illustrated.
Oh man, what do you think his message board handle is? And what is the most scandalous thing you think he said about Ohio State this week?
Boy, let's not get into that, Tom.
What do you think is his best Big Ten Penn State conspiracy theory?
Well, it's top 20. You could probably, because everybody has at least 30, and there probably no two Penn State fans have the same 30.
Right.
Because you're choosing from a pool of 4,000 to 6,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Big Ten's notorious anti-Penn State conspiracy, which involves Ohio State playing the whiteout game at night at Penn State every year, and Penn State playing during the day at Ohio State every year because the Big Ten is out to get Penn State, obviously.
The weather, we touched on it a little bit. Cold, probably raining. Right now, there doesn't look to be any doubt that it will be raining. But as Ryan Day said, for Wisconsin, everybody has to play in it. We know before that game, he was talking to his team about how we're going to thrive in it because we're tougher. This is what we want. We want this weather. And I'm sure they'll do the same thing this week. And also throw back to, look what happened at Wisconsin. We were the tougher team. And basically, they said, whatever it is, and we'll handle it. And I do believe him. And we talked about, is that the Wisconsin, is that better for Ohio State or Wisconsin, that type of weather? And it turned out it was clearly better for Ohio State. It feels like almost any weather is better for Ohio State because they are so much better than everybody else. I don't see rain helping Penn State when they need to be as perfect as possible on offense.
Well, yeah, and Penn State doesn't have a quarterback who necessarily can cut it through the wind quite like Justin Fields can. And, if Noah Cain, even if he goes, he's probably not 100% this week. One of my favorite BWI posts this week was about how Penn State had superior running back depth to Ohio State, even without Noah Cain. It's like, well, stats would disagree, facts would disagree, my eyes would disagree, but other than that, it's a strong, reasonable take.
And I probably had a bunch of plus ones. And
yes, yeah, and Ohio State has what is probably a superior offensive line to Penn State this week. Ohio State has a defensive line that's superior to Penn State's defensive line. So, and if Ohio State's running backs are better than Penn State's running backs, and Ohio State's quarterback is probably better equipped to play in the rain than Penn State's quarterback, that seems that all of that information seems like it's pointing in the same direction here.
I was rewatching the Penn State Minnesota game today and watching Sean Clifford throw balls to open receivers that couldn't get to them. Like they would land at their feet, and we're talking 20-yard passes. And if he's having to deal with any kind of conditions, that's going to take his accuracy way down. And he's already a quarterback who has only completed 60% of his passes in 2 Big Ten games this year, and that's just Maryland and Purdue, which, good job. Those are the 2 of the 4 or 5 worst Big Ten pass defenses in the Big Ten, actually. So, the more I watched of Penn State and the more I have watched of Penn State and don't just look at the box scores and the stats where I was also already kind of dismissing them, the more I watched of them, the more I was getting just certain that I don't see how this offense handles Ohio State's defense, because Sean Clifford, while he will be able to pick up some first downs on third down, something like that, they're going to have to hit some home runs. Journey Brown can do that, and he did that against Minnesota, and they've done that a little bit against Indiana, but they didn't do much of that before these last 2 games. I think they had like 1 30-yard run in October, and they've got 4 in November in just these 2 games. But I'm not super concerned about the Penn State offense in any weather.
It seems like they can hit some big plays potentially, but with the way Jeff Havley has talked about limiting big plays being kind of the number one job for the defense, if they hit a 25-yard run, a 30-yard run, a 35-yard run, that's not ideal for Ohio State, obviously. But if it's not a 70-yard run, if it's not an 85-yard run or an 85-yard pass like Ohio State was giving up last year, they start on the 25, they bust a 30-yard run. Okay, now they're at the plus 45. Okay, now they got to either do it again or they got to pick up some first downs. And, how many of those big plays are they going to get? Probably not a ton. And then you still have to drive consistently on this defense. And, if Ohio State's corners and defensive backs seem like they should be able to essentially man up on Penn State's wide receivers and, not necessarily lock them down, but at least contain them. Just straight up manned up. So then you can focus your front 7 on the run game. And, how consistently is Penn State going to be able to run the ball? If you can't run the ball consistently and you can't throw the ball consistently, you aren't hitting too many big plays.
But other than that,
yeah, you can score some points, but how do you get to 28 points if you're not able to consistently run the ball, consistently pass the ball, or consistently hit big plays?
Yeah, and whether or not KJ Hamler is playing, and Ryan Day already told you, Tom, he's playing. The guys they have behind him, Pat Freiermuth, the tight end, is very good, has like 7 touchdown catches, and he is going to be an issue that we need to talk about. The other receivers, Jahan Dotson and Justin Shorter, and they've got another guy who came in that 2018 class. Jahan Dotson has about 20 catches. He has a catch in every game this year, so he's somebody that you have to worry about. Justin Shorter was the number 1 receiver in the 2018 class. I think he has maybe 1 or 2 catches in the last 5 weeks. He has yet to live up to that hype. The other sophomore they have has maybe 1 or 2 catches in the last 5 weeks. If KJ Hamler can't go, then you are going to, regardless, you are going to need these receivers, these sophomore receivers who have yet to be consistent and yet to show they are consistent, make every play available to them. I watched Justin Shorter drop a touchdown catch, I believe. I watched the other sophomore drop a catch against Minnesota, like right in their hands, and just complete drops. And it's not the first time they've done it. And they need those 3 guys to step up, Dotson included, against a secondary that, like you said, should be able to lock them down. I don't think they are concerned. Jahan Dotson, Ohio State wanted him. Everybody wanted Justin Shorter. Dotson is a quick guy, not unlike KJ Hamler. KJ Hamler is just faster than everybody else. But this feels like a receiving group that shouldn't pose a whole bunch of issues, even though people tell us, and we're trying to say, or we're saying, that this is the best group of receivers, the best passing game Ohio State has seen this year. And Ohio State has not seen any quarterbacks really this year. And so those words may be correct, but if you look at the numbers these guys are putting up, it's like, well, that's not much of a concern either.
Right. This seems like, if you look at Penn State, especially Penn State without Hamler, the profile of the offense is not that dissimilar from Wisconsin. They sort of get there a different way, but they're going to have to run the ball. Their quarterback can run the ball a little bit. Their quarterback is not great, and he doesn't have a fantastic arm, and it's not super accurate, and weather might impact him, and you got to kind of watch out for the tight end. I mean, Freiermuth, if you take Hamler out of the equation, Freiermuth is their leading receiver this year. 34 catches, 424 yards, 7 touchdowns. You almost have to figure he's going to get 5-6 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown. Like, you just kind of have to bake that in because he's good. He's big. He's big enough that he's a matchup problem, for Ohio State, just in terms of size and speed, because he's a matchup problem for everyone. So you just kind of have to bake that in. And okay, he gets his 5 for 75 and a touchdown. Journey Brown or Noah Cain, ends up in the 75 yards rushing and maybe a touchdown there. Like, okay, where's the rest of it coming from? Because I haven't seen anything from the Penn State defense that suggests that they're going to hold Ohio State to 17 points. So, like, where's the rest of the offense coming from that gets Penn State's number up to where Ohio State's is?
What I was wondering is, would Ohio State, how they're moving Chase Young around now, do you move him to Freiermuth's side just to see if they'll keep him in, thereby limiting another potential weapon and limiting the passing game? And now you take your second best receiver out of the action entirely to help block Chase Young while you send out lesser receivers, or do you? They're going to have to keep him in at times. That's just because you got to block him different ways. But I think I'll be interested to see if they put him over on that side more, just to limit their ability to throw the ball to different guys. Because if he's not going out for a route, if he's chipping, he's pass blocking, he's helping out the left tackle, the right tackle, that's benefit there, even if Chase Young doesn't get to the quarterback.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really interesting idea. And as you were saying that, I was thinking the real sad thing about this week is that Mike Gesicki's still not Penn State's tight end, who's the receiving tight end, because Mike Gesicki took a, you want to say casual approach to blocking. It wasn't the most enthusiastic blocker in the world. Like that would be a real fun matchup to watch. But yeah, that's actually an interesting idea, because I mean, that's something that we've heard about. I think Jeff Hafley talked about that earlier this week. Is when Chase Young's out there, not only are teams running shorter passing, shorter routes because they know the quarterback has less time, but you're also keeping tight ends, running backs in there. So if you can take Journey Brown, Pat Fryermuth out of that passing attack just through Chase Young, that's a major limiting factor, even if Chase Young isn't picking up a sack on that play.
Yep, because you still have everybody else on that defensive line pressuring him as well. And even having Chase Young out there, I feel like even if he's not getting to the quarterback, just the simple fact of the quarterback knowing Chase Young is on this field somewhere, that changes you. That changes the time. You're thinking, I already don't have enough time for as much time as I'm taking. So you might be rushing things regardless, simply because you know he's not at home anymore. And so you have to deal with him. There's going to be some RPOs this week, and there will be some RPOs next week. The way Ohio State has been batting passes down at linebacker the last couple of weeks, with Malik Harrison and Kayvon Pope with 2 interceptions, has me thinking they've sort of been preparing for this.
Yeah.
Because they're in that zone of getting in the way of that quick RPO to either the slot or the tight end. And I'm thinking there will be some issues, some passes defended that way, but it's going to be very important to defend the RPOs, because that's part of Penn State's offense. That's part of Fryermuth's success and KJ Hamler in the slot. It's going to be significant to either knock those passes down or tackle KJ Hamler immediately, because we saw what happened last year. When you don't, he ends up going 93 yards on you.
That play was very interesting, because Shaun Wade, after the Rutgers game, talked about that play and said he still thinks about that play. And Hafley was asked on Tuesday about that, and he goes, "Oh, well, we're going to work with Shaun on that this week, because you have to have, one of Hafley's central ideas is you've got to have a short memory as a corner. You can't get hung up on something bad that happened before, because if you're still thinking about that, that can screw with you moving forward." So it'll be interesting to see if Shaun Wade's matched up against KJ Hamler. Like, that's going to be a real interesting story to watch, because Wade has played a lot of that slot corner this year. So that seems like that should be a matchup.
Yep.
Now, Shaun Wade is a far better player than he was this time last year. The Ohio State defense on the whole is a far better defense than it was this time last year. Because, remember, this game was in September last year. This was not a late season. So this is basically a season and a half later for Shaun Wade. So that is for sure going to be an interesting matchup to keep an eye on Saturday.
I still remember after that game, Shaun Wade was asked something like, "What did you learn from that?" And first of all, it was, "What did you do wrong in that play?" And he said, "I took a step backwards." And they're like, "Well, what did you learn from that play?" He's like, "Not to take a step backwards." It's like, well, there, it's solved. Problem solved.
Yeah, and then things went great for the Ohio State defense the rest of the year.
That was it.
Fine. Yeah,
it was great. Sean Clifford, I'm looking at his numbers. Last week, 47.8% completion percentage against Indiana. The week before against Minnesota, 52.3. Even back against Pittsburgh, 46.7. He's, like you said, he doesn't have the arm to cut through stuff. The accuracy is troublesome. He's a guy I think they can take advantage of. He's thrown 6 interceptions. 3 of them were last week. One of them kind of came after a blatant pass interference that wasn't called. Antoine Winfield had 2 of those interceptions. So you got to credit him because he's an amazing player. Arguably one of the 2 greatest Antoine Winfields of all time, probably the second.
I was going to say, how does the guy still have eligibility? He was in college when I was in college. How is that possible?
That's Big Ten education, grad transfers, transfer portals. You know how it goes. But I think the Clifford passing game, the Penn State running game, these are 2 things that aren't as dynamic as Penn State's rankings would have you believe. And so Ohio State's defense should be able to handle both aspects.
Yeah, just in general, Penn State, the idea of Penn State's sort of ranking and the scoreboard has not necessarily reflected the level of play that they've had this year. I mean, last week at Indiana, or home against Indiana, Indiana had 6.4 yards per play to 5.5 for Penn State. You got outgained by almost a yard per play. Their post-game win expectancy with SP Plus was 29%, which is just basically like that's not kind of that stupid surface level like, oh, they're up by 17 points with 12 minutes left of the third quarter and therefore they have a 0.2% chance of losing. It's not that. It is just, if you look at the stats after the game, filtering out garbage time on a yards per play kind of basis, how often, if you outgain your opponent by this many yards, how often will you win? Indiana would have won 71% of those games. Because there's certain stuff in football that's kind of fluky and can change a game without being something that you necessarily, if you're +7 in turnovers, a lot of times turnovers are just kind of random. So, that can change the outcome of a game without necessarily being anything more than luck. Penn State last week against Indiana probably should have lost that game. Penn State got outgained in a whole bunch of games. Penn State got outgained by Buffalo earlier this year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's remarkable because they won that game and total yardage is not a good measure, blah, 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 blah. But they won that game 45-13, but it was, on a total yardage basis, Buffalo had 429 to 357 for Penn State. Now, and that one, Penn State did outgain them on a yards per play basis by a good chunk. But, there's a bunch of these games where Penn State has ended up winning or winning by a lot, where once you actually dig into the numbers, it's like, that was more of a coin flip than you might think.
Well, they have yet to run for over 200 yards against an FBS team this year. They beat Michigan State by 21 points, 28-7, but they put up 302 total yards. They were held under 300 yards by both Iowa and Michigan. So you would expect Ohio State to be able to operate at a similar level. The other side of the ball, there's also some advantages for Ohio State here as well, which might shock you, Tom. The nation's number one scoring offense against a Penn State pass defense that is not very good. Now, here's what I'll say, Tom. The run defense is number one in the nation. We'll see if that's how legit that is. The pass defense reminds me of last year's Ohio State pass defense.
Yes. Which word did you say better describes this year's Penn State pass defense? Flammable or inflammable?
Indeed.
Trick question. They mean the same thing, and they're on fire. Yeah, I mean, that has been the area where teams have consistently been able to attack Penn State. It's just over the top. You get someone in that defensive backfield and you got safeties running the wrong way, and it looks just like there's just a lot of confusion on the back end of that defense.
Exactly right.
It's not that they don't have like good players. It does not look like a well-coached defensive backfield. And, you look at the Ohio State offensive brain trust. I mean, Mike Yursich, Kevin Wilson, Ryan Day, those guys have a sense for how to scheme up a passing offense. And you look at how well coached the Ohio State wide receivers are and how, what good route runners they are. That seems like you're going to get a bunch of guys turning their hips the wrong way. A safety's out of his position and all of a sudden, there's a 75-yard touchdown for someone.
Well, I was watching the Minnesota game where I saw two guys run with a receiver and then the underneath route was left wide open and caught, and the defense still had their backs to the ball and were still running, chasing the guy without the ball.
I can't think of a time that's happened, more locally in the recent past.
But when you watch that Penn State, that's exactly what it reminded me of, like confused Ohio State, where there's guys running all sorts of different directions. It's like you let kids loose out at recess and they're all going to different things. Like, I'm going to the merry-go-round, I'm going to the slide, I'm going to the Papa-Shot, or whatever you call it. You
had Papa-Shot it? I'm moving to Hamler.
We had stuff. We're pretty fancy. But they're all running in different directions, and maybe three of them are running towards the ball. And you'll see some of that, and I foresee some missed tackles, some, just as you said, some bad coverage that leads to big plays. Penn State has given up 18 passes of 30 yards or more this year. That's Second worst in the Big Ten to Rutgers at 19.
Now, if you're very close to being, Rutgers level in literally anything, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It is a bad thing, Tom. In fact, you could go one step further and say it is a very bad thing. Now, what I will say about these passes, only one of those 18 have gone beyond 50 yards. So
they're mostly having these busts on the plus side of the 50 is what I'm hearing?
Exactly. So I was going to say they have a very deep safety who makes all the tackles eventually. But you're right. Some of these all might be happening at like the 40. So there's going to be areas and opportunities to make stuff happen. And if you give Justin Fields time, we've seen him start to come out of his shell, or at least be allowed to come out of his shell. And Ryan Day didn't say they would protect him, or he was asked, will you no longer protect him in terms of running the ball? And he said, they're still going to keep an eye on that, but it feels to me like this is where you let him loose and the passing game will unfold. And off of that, he'll scramble and pick up some yards there. But I feel like they can really put the hammer down on this pass defense and not even if they can't run, but if they can run. Either way, I think it's going to be a pretty good day for Justin Fields.
Yeah. Do you know what Penn State or Minnesota's passing was 2 weeks ago against Penn State?
I know they threw for 339 yards and
18 for 20.
Yes.
So if you're allowing 90% completions, how does that seem like that's going to work out for you against Ohio State?
Yeah, and it's boggling that that takes accuracy, but it also takes no defense.
Right. I mean, that's like we mentioned that on one of our shows before the Rutgers game. Ohio State went 30 for 33 against Rutgers last year in passing. Like, throwing against air, you're going to have some incompletions if you're throwing it that many times. 18 for 20, that means you didn't tip any passes. You didn't have close coverage that, you didn't have a pass rush that was getting to the quarterback.
You didn't have a hand in the way of the ball.
Right. Nothing. And there are vulnerabilities on this Ohio State offense. I think that we would probably both agree that the pass pro has been a concern this year. Penn State has not gotten to the quarterback the last couple of weeks. I mean, you look at their Minnesota game, you look at their Indiana game, they're not getting to the quarterback. If you're not getting to the quarterback and there's confusion in your defensive backfield, you're giving Justin Fields time in the pocket, you're giving those wide receivers time to run routes, maybe work themselves open. That doesn't seem like that's going to work real well.
Yeah, so Tanner Morgan, 90% of his completions, completed 90% of his passes. Last week, Peyton Ramsey, 75.6% of his passes. These are things that Justin Fields can do. The weather might impact that some, but there's going to be, the way you mentioned, the way they run the routes, as consistent as they are, as deep as they are, they're so sound technique-wise, and then they run plays off of plays and routes off of routes, and they clear out stuff for somebody else, either deep or underneath. It just feels like a bad matchup, like an overmatched secondary against a passing offense that maybe should have been playing the league up.
This seems like the kind of game that if you put it in a dome and there's no rain, there's no wind, Ohio State, like Justin Fields puts up 400 yards passing and, Ohio State breaks 50 points. Now, you're not playing in a dome. It's going to be windy. It's going to probably be rainy. So that's going to hold those numbers down a little bit. But, with perfect conditions, if Ohio State and Penn State somehow manage to play in the Big Ten championship game, which I know is not feasible due to divisional alignment, but this seems like a game where they could potentially, put up just crazy, crazy numbers.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that limits them this week is the weather will limit it a little bit. But it just, there's not enough defense from Penn State. Now, the run defense, 75 yards a game, number one in the nation. I feel like Ohio State will at least double that. The question is, will they triple it? And probably, if they need to. Maybe they don't need to. They've rushed for over 200 yards in every game this year. I wouldn't be shocked. They've done it to Wisconsin. They've done it to Michigan State. If I put the over-under at 200, where are you at?
I guess you have to take the over. Because they're good against the run, and we talked on Tuesday about Robert Windsor, the defensive tackle, and Etor Gross-Matos coming off the edge. I mean, they have a good, especially a good front seven, good defensive line, but if they're getting torched deep, you've got to adjust somehow. Like, you can't just play a base defense. If you're just getting torched deep, they're going to have to adjust to that, and that's going to open up the run game. And if they're getting torched deep, that means Ohio State's up, which means Ohio State can pound that ball, try and just keep that clock moving. Because there's a certain, one of the things that's going to keep Ohio State from getting to 50 points this week probably is number one, the weather. Number two, hey, there's another game next week that's kind of some significance. So as soon as Ohio State's up by a level, an amount that they are comfortable with, it becomes Michigan week at that point, and it's just, okay, get out of here healthy and turn the page to the next game.
So, Tom, it has now come to the time where we make our game picks known to everybody, including to ourselves for the first time, as we try to think of them on the spur of the moment.
I was going to say, every week we start doing this and I go, oh, so I have to do a game pick this week.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the first week since last week that you've had to do a game pick. And Tom, I will let you go first.
Well, I'm going to have to go a little more conservative than I did last week. Penn State, I mean, for whatever limitations Penn State's defense has, they hold Ohio State not just under 200 points, but under 100 points this week. I mean, it's, I don't want to say
Save the bold stuff for the Patreon shows.
I don't want to say Ohio State struggles necessarily, but less than 100 points for sure this week. I keep thinking something in the, when we started, I would probably have been something in the 34-20 kind of range for Ohio State. I think I might have talked myself into 34-14, maybe. Penn State just doesn't get enough traction. So, yeah, something in that range. Ohio State probably covers, but I would not be laying 19 points because I'm not so confident that they're going to win by. I'm not so confident that they're going to be willing to do the things that they would be necessary to win by that many points.
You're saying they could, they're just choosing not to because of the more important game coming up.
That's what I think that's probably where I am.
So 34-13, you don't need to make that 41-13. You can just kind of start slowing it down.
Yeah.
On the radio today, I went with 45-17, and I will stick with that considering 42 of those will come in the first half.
Oh, man. If Ohio State scores 42 points in the first half against Penn State, that I have been around a lot of significantly hyped Ohio State-Michigan games in my time in Columbus, but if Ohio State hangs 42 on Penn State in the first half, that would be up there for the most excited this town has been.
Well, and the kicker would be the field goal would come towards the end of the fourth quarter as Ohio State is calling timeouts to get the ball back in order to then drive for the final field goal. Because you know what? They need the practice of getting those field goals down at the end, as we saw against Penn State a few years ago. You can never have enough practice with this. Within
5 minutes, one direction or the other, what time does Justin Fields take his final snap of the game?
Oh, man, this is going to be a lot of radio silence as we both try to think. Within 5 minutes, one way or the other. I think he stays out there for the entirety.
I think that 5 minutes left in the game, plus or minus 5 minutes, is probably the safest bet.
Yeah.
But, if he came off the field with 5 minutes left, that wouldn't completely.
Because we know 28 points is not enough.
Yes.
But it's probably enough in the final 5 minutes.
Yes.
Right?
Well, and potentially do they keep most of the first team defense out there, but, just pull Fields off the field and you keep the first team offensive line out there, but you've got Chugs taking the snaps and handing it to Master Teague.
I would go 5 minutes. That way I have some leeway. But, yeah, that's a good question because at that point, just you've made it this far. Mm-hmm. Don't screw it up now.
Well, there's a limited number of things that could screw this Ohio State season up. And Justin Fields' injury is number one on the list. So,
all right, Tom. That's a great show. good job. I think we've reached the end of this preview.
All right. Well, then I guess it's time to plug Patreon one more time. We did a bonus show earlier this week. We do kind of it's kind of like a Michigan Monday kind of show every week for our Patreon subscribers. If you're interested in doing that, getting that, patreon.com/Buckeye Weekly. You can sign up for those.
And then we look at the week ahead.
Yep, we've got another. Yep, we kind of look ahead at the games coming up, and then we'll have another Patreon episode coming out Friday this week for our subscribers only, and that'll be kind of a deeper dive on some kind of over-unders and that kind of stuff, sort of a better sense, kind of specifically what we're expecting this weekend.
Right.
And
it's fun stuff.
And then next week, Michigan week. I don't think we have exact numbers, but the number of podcasts is going to be a bunch next week because
we're actually trying to figure out how actually to provide as much as we would like, and the hours are hard to find.
It turns out our wives will probably not be thrilled if we're actually recording on Thanksgiving. So,
yes, pass the peas, and then Tom, about Zach Charbonnet.
Over under on number of servings of stuffing we will eat this weekend.
So we will talk to you guys later. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.